Psychology in the news.
Let's take it out to our weatherman.
Yes, weatherman today. Welcome to the UT Smog News Weather Center. And today we're going to be talking about the weather. We're going to be talking about the psychological weather of the United States. So I want to start this by thinking about people from different regions in terms of their personalities. So we've been talking about personality a little bit already. So think about the average Texan person. Is there a certain personality you'd associate with that? What about the average person from Oklahoma? Or the average person from New York or from California? We certainly have stereotypes about people's personalities from different regions, but is there anything to that? So let's take one of the kind of most common stereotypes. So there's this sort of stereotype of the kind of busy New Yorkers who are kind of aggressive and they don't have much time and they're anxious and neurotic, versus on the West Coast, the Californians, especially the Southern Californians, are kind of easygoing and laid back and spend their time on the beach and that kind of thing. So we have these geographic stereotypes, but is there anything to them? Well, we've been doing research for many years now where we have been collecting people's big five personality profiles along with their zip codes. They provide their zip code data. And that allows us to say, well, okay, is it true that people from different regions have different personalities? And so what we're going to be looking at today is heat maps. Heat maps, but instead of mapping heat, the heat maps are reflecting differences in personality. So here we see a heat map of the United States, and just like a heat map, and this is for the personality trait of neuroticism. So if you think, according to the stereotypes, the people from New York should be high on this trait, and the people from California should be low on it. They should be low on neuroticism. They should be high on emotional stability, the other end of that same pole. And so what do we see here? We see, well, if you look here, we see there is something to the stereotype, at least according to these data, which show we see red areas in the kind of the Northwest, which indicates high levels of neuroticism. And then if we look at the California coast, Southern California, you see blue, very low levels of neuroticism. You also see low levels of neuroticism in the Pacific Northwest and in Florida, and also a little bit, if I can get out of the way, even in central Texas. So, okay, there are these differences in personality across the regions. How does it get that way? How would it come about that there might be geographic differences? Well, there are a number of processes, and one of these is what's known as founder effects. And this is the idea that the first people coming to an area, they essentially establish a certain level of a personality trait due to selective migration. That is, some people come that way. So think about how the United States has been settled and resettled in various waves of immigration. So now let's take another personality trait, and we're going to look at the personality trait of openness to experience. So here you see the kind of heat map of openness in the US. And so you can see we have high openness on the coast, especially sort of New York and Florida, and we have high openness down the West Coast. But then if you look in the Midwest, we have very low levels of openness, right? And that might be consistent with the stereotypes we have about people from these different regions. So think about, like, what is it? Who is it who would come to the United States to settle? So there were many sort of waves of immigration. So if you can imagine people immigrating from Europe. Well, who is it who decides to set out and seek a new life, seek a new fortune, and to travel, in a sailing ship across the Atlantic Ocean, a very dangerous voyage? And of course, this is going to be people who both are okay with the unknown, they're okay, have a sense of adventure, they want to try something new. This is the idea of openness. So the idea here is that these people seeking out these things would arrive in these coastal regions, and then they would establish a unusually high level of openness in these port cities. So in New York would be one great example. But of course, that's not the only reason why people might move to a new place. There have also been waves of immigration for other reasons. So for example, there have also been waves of immigration for people fleeing religious persecution. So as you may know, many people fled religious persecution from the Netherlands and surrounding areas for their religion, and so they moved and they tended to settle in the Midwest. So you have a different factor driving the immigration in this case, and so these would be people high on religiosity, which tends to be associated with low openness. Now, of course, these are all just averages, so these are just average differences. There's great variation in all regions. And then once you have these differences, you can also have within-country migration. So you can think of the people from the East Coast going to the West Coast, migrating across. And of course, perhaps one of the most famous examples of this migration was in the case of the California gold rush, where people were going from the East Coast to California. Now, there were essentially three ways to get to California in those days. The first is to get on a sailing ship and sail all the way around the Cape, in the freezing Arctic waters without a compass and sails. So, that is a pretty treacherous journey. The other option is to go down through Central America, cross the isthmus, facing, cholera and malaria and bandits. Again, a lot of, a dangerous and perilous journey. Or you could essentially walk. You're going with an oxen cart, which go at about the speed of walking, and there's no roads, and you're going across mountains when not very poor maps. So again, who is it? It's not just anybody who decides to set out on a journey like that. And so this is the idea, is that so only, again, you have a very unique founding set of population in these areas. And then, of course, after a while, these areas may draw in other like-minded people. So then in subsequent years, you have extra additional waves of immigration for people who are high on openness, also looking to be around other high openness people.
Interesting, and it suggests that the who settles a population, but what if you're not founding a new place, you just happen to be born in California or happen to be born in Texas? Just does where you live actually shape your personality?
That's a great point. So there's also this idea of environmental effects, so that where you are may also influence you, and it could be the people around you. So for example, let's imagine, this, I'm holding up here the full scale of where you may be on openness to experience. So this hand is 0 and this place is 100. And you could say genetically or biologically you could be in this region or in this region. But there would be a kind of range around this. So high openness people would be this part of the scale, if the whole scale is like this, and low openness people would be this, but there'd be a range that they could be. And the idea is that if you are born in a place like in the middle of Manhattan, where there is many different types of people, many different cultures, many different foods, types of art, and so on, that would expose you to all these different ideas and thoughts, and that would tend to push your openness level to the highest it could be, whether you are at this part of the scale or at this part of the scale. Whereas if you lived in a place where it's just sort of, there's only one type of culture and one type of thought, and there aren't many people exploring different thoughts, then you might be at the low end of the scale no matter where you are. So both of these factors, these founder effects and environmental influences, can show how you might get these different geographic differences established, and then also how they might be maintained over time. And one of the important things here is that these things may, in a sense, snowball. Because if you go to a place, so for example, like California, where you have all of these innovative kind of high openness people, because they are people who value innovation and new things and new ideas, then other people who feel the same way will be encouraged to behave that way and will feel more welcome. Not only that, institutions that support that. So if you have a lot of innovation, entrepreneurial activity in that area, there will be banks and other institutions and universities and things that support that kind of behavior and make it continue to grow, and so you can establish, and that's how these sort of differences in geographic regions in terms of personality can get established.
So this suggests, when you start thinking about differences in culture and differences in institutions, this suggests that it might actually matter for your life. Like there might actually be consequences to living in a place that's very neurotic or very open to experience, or maybe very warm and cuddly and agreeable.
Absolutely. So that when you have a lot of people behaving in, say, an open way, or in an agreeable or disagreeable way, or in an extroverted way, those things tend to add up and have implications for the region. So, for example, we have found that the areas that are high on openness, those areas tend to have very high entrepreneurship rates. They have high levels of patents being taken out. They have people going to more cultural events and museums and so on. If you take another trait such as agreeableness, for agreeableness, people low on agreeableness in regions that have many people low on agreeableness, as you might expect, they tend to have higher crime levels, specifically crime associated with violence. So they have a high violent crime rates. The areas high in neuroticism, they tend to have higher rates of disease and illness. So, for example, you have higher rates of cancer-related illness and cancer-related death in areas with high neuroticism. So you can see how these differences get established and have real-world implications.